"You're worthless without a paycheck, Caleb," Lydia Brooks spat, ripping her wedding ring off and tossing it into the dirt as she clung to the site foreman's arm. "You can't even carry bricks anymore," she hissed, laughing as her husband stood silent, fists trembling, humiliated before the workers. She thought she was trading up, leaving a man she called a failure for one she believed held power. But what Lydia didn't know was that the man she mocked as a broke laborer was the hidden owner of the entire construction empire. Everyone thought Caleb Brooks was broken, but inside he carried the keys to every tower they stood beneath. And when he finally revealed the truth, his revenge would shatter her, the foreman, and every soul who doubted him. Dear viewers, would you ever forgive someone who humiliated you in front of the world, or would you make them pay? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Unaware he owned the entire construction empire, Lydia Brooks humiliated her husband the day he lost his laborer job. In front of workers, she ripped off her wedding ring, threw it into the dirt, and wrapped her arms around the site foreman, declaring she was done with a broke man. She thought she had traded up, but what Caleb Brooks did next would shock her, the foreman, and everyone who ever doubted him. The laughter of men carrying steel rods echoed across the dusty site, but Caleb Brooks didn't hear it. He only saw the ring glinting in the dirt where his wife had dropped it. The ring he had saved 3 months' wages to buy when they were both 19 and broke, the ring he slipped on her finger in a small church where the pastor's Bible was missing a cover, but his voice shook with conviction. Lydia hadn't looked at him then with contempt, her eyes had been full of tears and belief. Now those same eyes were hard, cold. "Pick it up if you want," Lydia hissed, brushing dust from her dress as if his touch had stained her. "It means nothing to me now." Caleb opened his mouth, but the words dried. He could feel the workers staring. The foreman, Victor Kane, broad-shouldered and arrogant, slid his arm around Lydia's waist like claiming a prize. "Don't look so hurt, Brooks," Victor smirked. "Not every man is meant to be a provider. Some are meant to take orders." The men roared with laughter. Caleb forced himself to stand still, though his jaw locked so tightly it ached. His silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. But silence had never been Caleb's nature. Years ago, when he was only 21, he'd stood in a polished boardroom with men twice his age. His father, dying of cancer, had pressed a hand on his shoulder, "Don't let them steal it from you. This empire is yours. But before you lead it, you must understand what it feels like to sweat for it. To bleed for it." And so Caleb had vanished into the very sites his family owned, choosing sweat-stained shirts over suits. To everyone else he was just another man breaking his back for a paycheck. To Lydia, he was just a labor husband. And now, she was walking away from him. "Lydia, don't do this," he whispered, his voice trembling but steady enough to slice through the jeers. "We've been through worse. Remember the one-room apartment? Remember when we shared one pair of shoes between us?" Her laugh was sharp, cruel. "And that's exactly what I don't want to go back to. Victor offers me a future. You only offer me excuses." Victor kissed her temple deliberately, locking eyes with Caleb. "Go on home, Brooks. Your shift's over, for good." Caleb didn't move. His eyes followed Lydia as she walked away, arm in arm with the man who mocked him. He bent, picked up the discarded ring, and clenched it in his fist until the metal dug into his skin. No words. Just the faintest flicker of something in his gaze, something Victor and Lydia mistook for defeat. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a storm neither of them saw coming. The bar at the edge of town buzzed with laughter and neon lights, a sharp contrast to the grit of the construction site. Lydia sat in a red dress Victor had bought her, sipping wine as if she had been drinking it all her life. Her eyes glimmered with a pride she hadn't felt in years, the kind of pride she thought money alone could buy. Every time Victor's hand settled on her waist, she leaned into it, reminding herself she had traded up. "See, baby," Victor bragged, slamming his glass on the table. "This is only the start. Foremen like me, we don't stay small. Stick with me, and you'll live the life you always dreamed of." She laughed, resting her chin on his shoulder. I knew I made the right choice. Caleb, he was just dragging me down. Always talking about, someday. You're a man of now. Her words carried no hesitation, but deep down, a flicker of doubt stirred. A flashback clawed at her memory, Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, bent over papers, eyes fierce, scribbling in the margins. She had once asked, "What are you writing?" He had covered the page quickly and smiled, "Just plans, Lydia. For our future." At the time, she rolled her eyes, convinced it was fantasy. Victor snapped his fingers, pulling her back. Forget him. The man couldn't carry bricks, let alone carry you. Me. I run this site. Workers jump when I shout. Money follows power. The word power hung in the air, but Lydia didn't notice the irony. Meanwhile, across town, Caleb sat alone in his apartment, the ring Lydia had tossed lying on the table in front of him. His shirt was torn, his hands raw, but his eyes burned steady. He unfolded the same papers Lydia once mocked, contracts, deeds, corporate seals, all tied to Brooks Construction, the empire his father built from dust and sweat. The memory of his father's voice filled the room, never reveal your hand until the moment it matters. The world doesn't respect what you inherit, Caleb. It respects what you fight for. Caleb's lips pressed into a thin line. His fall today wasn't weakness, it was bait. And Lydia had taken it, choosing the shine of cheap promises over the weight of loyalty. At the bar, Lydia raised her glass in a toast. To us. Victor smirked, clinking it. To ruling the site. And soon, more. But his eyes betrayed hunger. He wasn't just after Lydia, he was after every shortcut to money he could grab. Even the bartender noticed when Victor pulled out a wad of cash too thick for a foreman's wage. Big spender tonight, the man muttered. Victor winked. When you know how to cut corners, the money flows easy. Lydia laughed and kissed his cheek, blind to the truth, every shortcut comes with a price. Across the city, Caleb leaned back in his chair, staring at the contracts. His silence wasn't defeat. It was calculation. He whispered to himself, let them laugh. When the foundation shakes, they'll know who built it. The morning sun painted the site in gold, but the atmosphere was bitter. Workers dropped their tools when they saw Lydia arrive, her heels clicking against gravel, Victor Kane strutting beside her like a king. Caleb was already there, shoveling dirt into a wheelbarrow, his shirt damp with sweat. He didn't lift his head when whispers broke out. Isn't that Brooks' wife? One worker muttered. Not anymore, another snickered. She belongs to the boss now. Victor smirked, tugging Lydia closer as if she were a trophy. Look at this man, he shouted, pointing at Caleb. A laborer who couldn't even keep his own wife. And now? He's still digging holes. The men laughed, but it wasn't all cruelty. Some faces held pity. They remembered when Caleb had been the first to share his lunch, the one who covered their shifts when they were sick. But pity didn't stop whispers from spreading. Lydia's gaze lingered on Caleb with something colder than hate, indifference. She had once kissed him in this same yard during a rainstorm, both of them soaked and laughing, promising they'd build a life from nothing. She remembered that moment like a ghost, and for a heartbeat, she faltered. But Victor's arm tightened around her, dragging her back to the present. Don't just stand there, Brooks, Victor barked. Move those piles. Faster. Caleb straightened, dirt on his hands, his eyes locking with Victor's. The site fell into silence as the tension thickened. Careful, Victor, Caleb said quietly, his voice low but firm. A foundation always looks dirty before the tower rises. The words hung in the air, confusing some, unsettling others. It sounded like defeat to a fool, but to anyone listening closely, it was something else, a promise. Victor scoffed, waving him off. You hear that? The man speaks in riddles because he has nothing else to offer. He slapped Caleb on the shoulder hard enough to sting, then pulled Lydia closer, kissing her in front of everyone. Lydia forced a laugh, but deep down, Caleb's words gnawed at her. A tower rising? What tower? She shook it off, drowning the unease in Victor's embrace. Caleb returned to his work without another word, but his silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. He thought of his father standing over blueprints in a quiet office years ago, whispering, "Let them think you're weak. Let them mock you." The higher they build their pride, the harder they fall when truth comes crashing down. The sound of steel beams clanging jolted the yard back to motion, but the workers couldn't shake Caleb's line. A foundation always looks dirty before the tower rises. Some of them repeated it under their breath, uncertain why it stuck. Victor laughed it off, but a flicker of unease passed through him. And Lydia, though she didn't admit it, couldn't stop glancing back at Caleb as she walked away. Something in his eyes had changed, not broken, not defeated, but calculating. And though no one knew it yet, this was the day the cracks began to form beneath Victor Kane's stolen throne. For 3 days Caleb Brooks vanished from the construction site. The workers whispered that he had finally broken under humiliation. Victor laughed louder than anyone, parading Lydia on his arm like a prize he had stolen fair and square. "He'll never show his face again," Victor boasted, but his laugh was too loud, almost desperate, as though he needed to believe it himself. Lydia forced her own chuckles, yet at night she tossed in bed beside Victor, haunted by the memory of Caleb's words, "A foundation always looks dirty before the tower rises." Miles away from the dusty site, Caleb adjusted his tie in the mirrored walls of an elevator that soared toward the top floor of a skyscraper. The transformation was startling. Gone was the dirt-stained shirt, in its place, a tailored suit that bore the quiet authority of old money and inherited power. But it wasn't vanity. Every polished detail was armor. As the doors opened, the boardroom of Brooks Construction fell silent. Executives, men in their 50s and 60s, rose to their feet instinctively. "Mr. Brooks," one said with reverence, "welcome back." Caleb gave a tight nod, though inside his chest a storm brewed. He remembered standing in that very room years earlier, a boy barely 21, watching his father cough blood into a handkerchief while pointing at the skyline through glass windows. "This empire will test you, son. Wealth attracts parasites. If you want loyalty, you must walk among men who think you are nothing, and see how they treat you." Caleb had listened. He had put on the boots of a laborer and disappeared into the dirt, searching for truth. "Everything is in place, sir," the CFO said, sliding documents across the table. "The audits confirm Victor Kane has been mismanaging funds. Workers are at risk. If we move now." "Not yet," Caleb interrupted, his voice calm, but every word heavy. "I want the rot to show itself fully. I want every mask to fall before I strip them bare." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One leaned forward. "Sir, forgive me, but the men, they don't know who you are. Even your own wife believes you are only a laborer. Why let yourself be humiliated?" Caleb's jaw clenched at the word wife. A flash of Lydia tossing the ring into the dirt burned his mind. He tightened his fist. Because humiliation reveals truth. And truth is the only weapon worth wielding. Meanwhile, on the site, Lydia walked the grounds with Victor. She carried herself with the arrogance of a queen, but when she saw workers glance at her with pity instead of envy, her smile faltered. She remembered Caleb once helping an old worker lift a beam that even 3 men struggled with. He had laughed as if pain was nothing. How could a man like that be weak now? She shook the thought away, clinging tighter to Victor's arm. Victor barked orders, cutting corners on safety to pocket extra cash. A scaffolding creaked dangerously overhead, and one worker muttered under his breath, "Brooks would never have allowed this." Victor snapped, "What was that?" The man fell silent, but unease rippled through the crew. Back in the boardroom, Caleb signed a paper with a slow stroke, his eyes unreadable. When the tower rises, he whispered, echoing his own foreshadow, they will know whose name is carved into every stone. The executives looked at one another, uncertain whether they were witnessing strategy, or the calm before a brutal storm. The days grew hotter, and with every sunrise Victor Kane's arrogance swelled. He strutted through the construction yard with Lydia clinging to his arm, shouting orders, cutting safety corners, and pocketing money that was never his to take. To the men who labored under him, it was clear, Victor treated the site as his personal kingdom. To Lydia, it looked like ambition. She mistook recklessness for power, never realizing how fragile a tower built on lies could be. One afternoon, the workers were ordered to rush a scaffolding build. The metal groaned under the weight of bricks stacked too high, the bolts loose where Victor had insisted cheaper supplies be used. Caleb, standing in the shadows near the supply shed, watched quietly. His silence was not absence, it was strategy. He had been there all morning, speaking softly with a few trusted men, noting details, watching how easily Victor gambled with human lives. Then it happened. A deafening crack split the air. The scaffolding buckled, tilting dangerously. A young worker, barely 19, clung to the rails as bricks rained down around him. Shouts rose, men scrambled. Victor cursed, but instead of helping, he barked at others, fix it before anyone notices. Don't call the inspectors. Do you want to ruin me? The worker slipped. For a breath, time froze. Caleb's eyes flashed, and in one swift motion he sprinted forward, catching the boy by the shirt before he hit the ground. Dust and sweat streaked his face, but his grip was steady. The yard fell silent. Easy, son, Caleb said, lowering him safely. His calm voice silenced panic. For the first time in weeks, the men looked at him not with pity, but with respect. Victor's face twisted. You think saving one clumsy boy makes you a hero, he spat. But even he saw the shift in the men's eyes. Caleb had risked his life without hesitation. Victor had risked theirs for profit. Lydia's lips parted as she watched Caleb. Memories rushed back uninvited, Caleb fixing their broken stove with bare hands, Caleb sitting up all night with her when she was sick, Caleb promising, I'll never let you fall, no matter how hard it gets. She buried the memory quickly, turning away, but something in her chest ached. Caleb dusted himself off, his gaze fixed on Victor. A foundation built on greed, he said evenly, will always collapse. The words cut deeper than any shout. A murmur swept the workers. Victor shoved him. Shut your mouth before I throw you off this site for good. But Caleb only smiled faintly, a smile that unnerved Lydia more than anger would have. It wasn't defeat. It was a promise of reckoning. That night, Victor pulled Lydia into a booth at the bar, slamming drinks on the table. His hands shook. He's nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. Just a washed-up laborer. The men are fools if they respect him. Lydia nodded, but her mind replayed Caleb's steady hands catching that boy. For the first time, she wondered if she had miscalculated. Miles away, in the quiet of his office, Caleb signed another set of documents, placing them in a black folder marked with Brooks Construction's seal. He whispered to himself, echoing his father's words, let the cracks spread. When it falls, I'll be there to bury them under their own rubble. And so the stage was set, not just for justice, but for brutal revenge. The city buzzed with rumors. Workers whispered about the scaffolding accident, about how Victor Kane had barked orders to cover it up, and how Caleb Brooks, once the site's laughingstock, had been the only man brave enough to act. Respect had begun to shift in silence, but Victor refused to see it. Lydia clung to him, trying to drown the unease growing in her chest, the same unease that haunted her at night when she remembered Caleb's steady hands saving that boy. Then the summons came. A company-wide meeting in the downtown headquarters of Brooks Construction. Every executive, foreman, and senior worker was expected to attend. Victor saw it as an opportunity. They're going to recognize me, he boasted to Lydia, straightening his tie in the mirror of their hotel suite. "With the way I've run things, they'll put me on the board." Lydia smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed doubt. She remembered a night years earlier when Caleb had come home late, exhausted yet glowing with quiet fire. He had whispered, "One day I'll build towers that scrape the sky." She had laughed then, thinking it a dreamer's fantasy. But now, when she repeated his words in her mind, they didn't sound so foolish. The boardroom that morning was a world apart from the dusty site. Polished marble floors gleamed under the lights, and the long mahogany table stretched across the room like a throne hall. Victor strutted in with Lydia on his arm, wearing a smug grin. The executives barely looked at him, their faces unreadable, but Victor mistook silence for respect. "You'll see," he whispered to Lydia, gripping her hand tightly. "They'll announce my promotion today." Lydia forced a nod, but the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. At the far end of the table, the chairman cleared his throat. "This meeting is to address serious allegations of corruption and safety violations on our sites. Mismanagement that could have cost lives." His eyes swept the room, settling on Victor. "Mr. Kane, you will answer for these charges." Victor laughed dismissively. "Allegations? Sir, with all due respect, I've been running that site better than anyone. If anything, the problem lies with unfit laborers like Caleb Brooks. He's the one you should be questioning." The room stiffened. Lydia's eyes darted nervously. The name Brooks seemed to echo louder than it should have. The chairman exchanged a glance with another board member. Then, slowly, he said, "Mr. Kane, you seem unaware of who truly runs this empire." The doors opened. Caleb Brooks stepped inside. No dirt, no sweat-stained shirt. He wore a tailored black suit, his presence calm but commanding. Gasps rippled across the room. Victor's smug grin crumbled. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth, her wine-red nails trembling against her lips. Caleb's eyes scanned the room, then settled on Victor. "You said I wasn't fit to carry bricks," he said, his voice steady but sharp as steel. "But tell me, Kane, how will you carry the weight of every life you've endangered?" The silence was suffocating. For the first time, Victor had no words. And for the first time, Lydia realized she had traded not up, but catastrophically down. Victor's palms sweated as Caleb's presence dominated the room. The board members didn't look at him anymore, they looked at Caleb with reverence, as though the rightful king had returned. Lydia clutched Victor's arm, but her nails dug into his sleeve out of fear, not pride. She remembered every night she had mocked Caleb for coming home with dirt on his clothes, never realizing those same hands held signatures that moved millions. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a black folder on the mahogany table and slid it open. Inside were photographs of unsafe scaffolding, receipts for stolen supplies, signed authorizations with Victor's name scrawled across them. Each page was a nail hammered into Victor's coffin. Every corner you cut. Every dollar you stole. Every life you gambled with for your greed, Caleb said, his tone cold and precise, is written here. Victor tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "You can't prove anything. I run that site better than." The chairman slammed his fist against the table. "Enough. These records were verified by our auditors. Kane, you endangered the empire and its workers for profit." Lydia's throat tightened. She glanced at Caleb, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't meet his eyes. A flash of memory haunted her, Caleb cradling her head after her miscarriage, whispering, "You'll never face pain alone as long as I live." She had believed him then. She had forgotten that man. Now, she saw him again, but this time, his eyes held no softness for her. The boardroom door opened, and two men in dark suits entered. Not bodyguards, detectives. Victor's bravado evaporated. "Wait," he stammered, sweat trickling down his temple. This is a mistake." He turned to Lydia as if she could save him. Tell them, babe. Tell them I'm not. But Lydia stayed frozen, watching her world collapse. She had tied herself to a sinking ship, and Caleb had been the storm waiting to drag it under. Caleb leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper but heavy enough to crush. You thought I was beneath you, Cain. But men like you are the dirt, the kind I build towers on. The detectives clasped Victor's wrists, snapping cuffs around them. He roared, struggling, but his voice was drowned in the silence of the board. His reign ended in chains. Lydia broke. She rushed to Caleb, falling to her knees in front of him. Tears streaked her carefully painted face. Caleb, I didn't know. I swear, if I had known, please, give me another chance. You're the man I loved, the only man I. Caleb's gaze cut through her like glass. He remembered the ring glinting in the dirt, the laughter in her voice as she left him for Victor. He bent slightly, close enough for only her to hear. You loved money, Lydia. And now you have none. Her sobs echoed as the boardroom doors shut behind Victor's screams. Caleb didn't look back. The brutal revenge wasn't in raising his hand, it was in letting them destroy themselves while he stood untouched. And yet, as he walked to the head of the table, one final storm brewed, because revenge had a price, and Lydia wasn't done paying hers. The city gathered under the shadow of a gleaming new skyscraper, its glass walls catching the morning sun like fire. A banner stretched across the entrance, grand opening, Brooks Construction. Crowds pressed forward, reporters jostling, cameras flashing. To them, this was just another unveiling. To Caleb Brooks, it was Judgment Day. He stood at the podium in a dark suit, the same hands once blistered from hauling bricks now steady on polished wood. The workers who once pitted him filled the crowd, their whispers carrying awe. They remembered the man who caught a boy from falling, the man mocked as weak who now stood as the empire's head. Caleb's voice rolled over them with quiet thunder. This tower is more than steel and glass. It is proof that betrayal cannot shake a foundation built on truth. In the back of the crowd, Lydia stood alone. She wore the same red dress Victor had bought her months before, but now it looked faded, worn thin by nights spent in cheap motels after Victor's arrest drained her world. She clutched her purse tightly, eyes fixed on Caleb. Every word was a blade cutting deeper. Flashbacks tore through her mind unbidden. Caleb rubbing her swollen feet after 12-hour shifts. Caleb pawning his watch to buy her medicine when she fell ill. Caleb whispering, "Stay with me through the storms, and I'll give you a castle one day." She had laughed then. She had traded him for a man who built on lies. And now she was watching that castle rise before her eyes, belonging to the man she discarded. She pushed through the crowd, desperate, until she was close enough to whisper. "Caleb," her voice cracked, trembling. "Please, take me back. I was blind, I didn't see who you really were." Caleb's gaze shifted down to her, and for a brief second the memories tried to soften him. The church where he had slid a cheap ring on her finger. The nights they had dreamed together on a mattress laid on the floor. But then he remembered the dirt, the laughter, the taste of humiliation when she wrapped her arms around Victor and spat on him. His jaw tightened. "You saw exactly who I was, Lydia," he said, voice low but sharp enough for those nearby to hear. "And you decided I wasn't enough. Now you see who I am, but it's too late." Tears blurred her vision. She clutched his sleeve desperately, but security moved to pull her back. Reporters' cameras flashed, catching every second, the woman who abandoned him now begging in the dirt. Caleb turned back to the crowd, his voice steady. "This tower is dedicated to every man who was mocked for being less, and every woman who thought loyalty was worth less than gold. Let this be a reminder, greed builds nothing. Loyalty builds empires." The applause thundered. Lydia's sobs were drowned beneath it. She fell to her knees as Caleb raised the scissors to cut the ribbon, his face calm, his revenge complete. And as the crowd roared, she realized the brutal truth. The man she had mocked as a laborer had become untouchable, and her punishment was not his anger, it was his indifference.